apps coming to Mac OS by 2021 is a good thing. It's because inherently it's going to give you more of an app selection than you're going to traditionally find in Mac OS, the Mac OS store. Plus, you still have that legacy ability to put on, regular old school kind of packages onto Mac for whoever needs to use those. Even though a lot of people that have Macs use the creative apps that you find in the Mac OS store and whatever other side thing program, be it Spotify, maybe something through Steam to play a limited selection of games, then people go outside of that Mac app store. But with iOS, iPad, iPhone, that type of thing coming to Mac OS, you get a lot more apps, and they're going to be at a cheaper price point, and it can remain at that cheaper price point because you have that install base from iPhone, iPad. Then you're adding it into Mac OS, so you don't have to necessarily raise the prices because it's programs that are covering 3 different types of devices, and those devices have large amount of numbers coming in with the iPhone and the iPad. So you can get a app like LumaFusion that's $20 to $30. Use that on a Mac instead of something like a Final Cut Pro or what have you. That's going to cost 10 times as much. Even though Final Cut Pro has features that LumaFusion doesn't, but for a lot of people, LumaFusion is going to be a high-level video editor that's way above iMovie. And you'll have more games beyond what you could try to get from Steam. For Mac, we have a lot of those games that are already on iOS, and since iOS Macs, they have these powerful A13, and they're gonna have A whatever is coming down the line. These powerful chips that can run console level gaming, as we've seen with the iPad, where it can run NBA 2K. That's gonna bring those type of games to the Mac. Yeah, with the Macs right now and the Mac desktops, for a while, there's gonna have to be emulation because those are x86 64 type of chips, and this is iOS. These applications are based on ARM, but eventually, at least in the MacBooks, they're going to switch to ARM processors, and with those ARM processors, you're gonna be able to play natively those games that were for iOS, iPad, kind of games. So you're gonna get those higher level games on Mac, and then you can emulate that older software that's for x86, x64 to run on a new ARM processors that you're going to have in a Mac. So this is beneficial because this just increases the service aspect of it in terms of having this one app store. And we know Apple wants to focus on services over hardware. So hey, you have more devices running your most profitable, your big time apps, which come from the iOS, iPad, iPhone kind of store, just the app store. That will be good for Apple, and that'll be good for the people. So yeah, it's definitely something to look forward to. I expect it to be great. I expect it to be implemented much better than Android apps on Chrome, because Apple does control the hardware. I'm sure they'll have tight control over that and tight control over the emulation as well. And they're definitely moving to ARM in the future because they want to get away from the Intel, AMD, that kind of thing. Those x86, x64 processors. Specifically, Apple wants to move away from Intel, and they are moving away from Intel. So it definitely opens up possibilities. And it might even sell a few more Macs for all I know, because certain apps are only for, say, the iPhone, certain communication apps. And now you'll be able to have those communication apps on your Mac. So instead of just having the iMessage going across both devices, you can have other messaging apps that you may use, or other social media apps that you may use that are mobile only on your Mac now, and be able to use that across devices. So it definitely has a lot of benefits for the consumer, especially as it pertains to, those type of apps, just having access, and as it pertains to having high quality apps in general, in terms of gaming, and just more selection in terms of gaming beyond Steam store and what have you. So with that, 2021, this next decade coming up, you're going to see Apple being able to possibly compete with Microsoft in terms of gaming. Because, hey, we know a lot of games are made for Windows, what have you. But that's just made through Windows. Apple has a lot of games made for iOS that are ARM-based processing. So they'll be able to compete head to head in that space. And even along the lines of the horsepower that are in these A chips, whatever number with the X, those are very powerful chips, console level quality games. So Apple's going to be able to compete in that services space in terms of games, apps going forward, and they're going to be a contender. So I expect great things from Apple, and we're just hitting the cusp of that. So I wouldn't write Apple off in terms of gaming. It looks bleak now. It's looked bleak over years, but this is where Apple is going to make their comeback. They're just expanding what they built up in terms of the iPhone, the iPad, moving into the Mac. See, they can pick up a few more users, and they're good to go. And once people see how certain apps, especially I'm talking about games, can be remapped and maybe even enhanced to a degree to work on these MacBooks, oh snap, you got something else that can compete with a Windows machine, if you will. So 2020, 2021, going forward next decade, iOS apps on Mac, that's a good thing. That's my take. Iceberg Jim out. Deuces.